Okay. All righty, and let's see if I can share content. I want to share PyCharm, and I want to share Chrome. All right. So hope everyone had a good weekend. For those of you who might have had today off from work or whatever, hope you enjoyed it. But of course, UMBC thinks education is more important than holidays. I'm kidding. So we have class today. What we're going to do is talk some more about lists, which we started discussing last week. And we're going to get into some string operations. In some ways, strings are kind of like lists. They're not lists. They're different. We'll talk about how. But we'll talk about some of the operations. I mentioned last time that this is always an awkward area because lists, strings, and loops are so closely related that you really need to teach them all at the same time, but you can't because it would require a 5-hour class. So hopefully you got a good idea of what lists are from last week. After today, you'll know them better and you'll know more about strings. And then after Wednesday's class, when we get into loops, they'll all make total sense to you. A lot of the coding examples I'm going to do today, I'm going to build on in Wednesday when we get to loops, but we have to cover more properties of lists to make this thing make sense. So let's get started. Administratively, remember your homework 1 is due tonight. You have until midnight, 11:59:59. The gl.umbc.edu system will shut off at midnight. It will not accept any more homeworks. So get it in ahead of time. If you're close, get in something close before midnight so you don't get shut out. Homework 2 is out. We will have covered everything by Wednesday that's in it. I think actually everything that's in it we'll have covered by today, but I'll double check that. It is due again for this section next Monday. Homeworks are due on Monday in this section, not Friday. Again, try to get ahead of them because the work is going to pile up. We've got exams coming up. We've got our first exam coming up in 2 weeks, and we've got some programming projects in the future. So try to get ahead and stay ahead. All right. From last time, we talked about a fundamental type of Python called lists. Okay. Traditionally, we've talked about ints, booleans, floats, and strings. Those are fundamental types that are scalar. They contain one value and one value only. Lists are another fundamental type, but they're kind of a vector type. They can hold anywhere from 0 to as many as you want values. You can have a list with 0 values. That's an empty list, and they're very useful. You can create them. And you can have as many as you want. Now, the elements of a list don't have to be of the same type, but I mentioned last week that it's good programming practice to try and normally make sure they're all the same type, because otherwise you get confusion about what operations you could do on some list elements versus others. But they don't have to be of the same type. Now, let's go into some examples and go into some of the things we talked about. We declared a new empty list with just empty square brackets. Empty square brackets is a new empty list, or you can declare your list with initial values, putting them inside square brackets. Now, here in PyCharm, to prepare ahead of time, I have a list called states that is the list of the 50 states of the US. Okay. These are the 50 states. And so let's run this. Pardon me, let's bring the PyCharm thing. Let's run this code, which is called February 10th coding or 15th coding. And so now we have states as a defined element. Okay, fine. Let's go back to the console and get that in there as well. Now, we talked about a way to insert a state. There is some talk about the District of Columbia becoming, I'm sorry, the slides for the lectures on GitHub, yes, they should be. If these slides are not there, it's a good question. Let's go double check and make sure. If not, I will upload them right now. Spring 2021 lecture notes. Yes, it should be this file right here, more on lists and some on strings. Should be on GitHub. If you have problems getting it, let me know. Always good for me to check, assuming causes problems. Suppose we want to add Washington, D.C. as a state, because there's some talk that might happen. We can do it two different ways. One is we can add it to the end, and it will show up on the end of our list. And so that is states.append Washington, D.C. And now if we look at our list variable, we see that Washington, D.C. has been appended. And I called it Washington, D.C. to distinguish it from the state of Washington or Washington State, because we don't want two states with the same name. If D.C. becomes a state, they'll figure out what its name is. But for now, we just added it to the list with the append statement, okay? But I could put it using an insert method as well. And insert, I have to tell it where I want. Well, there's some discussion also about Puerto Rico being made a state. So let's say states.insert. Now, I want Puerto Rico to go, I'm going to make up a number arbitrarily. I'm going to say I want it to be the 23rd state, or the state with index 23, rather, not the 23rd state, remember. And now, when I look at states, we can see, I missed it. There it is, right there, in the middle of the M's, in between Minnesota and Puerto Rico. And if I want to verify that I got it right, I will say, what is states sub 23? And that is indeed Puerto Rico. So I can insert a state with an insertion, giving it an index. Remember, not the 23rd, because we always start at 0. States sub 0 is the first state, is Alabama. Now, we have the length function, which always tells us how many elements are in the list. In this case, since I've added Puerto Rico and DC, I now have 52 states. But if I say states sub length of states, that is always going to be an error, because that is always one too many. So the last element in the list is always referenced as length of the variable, length of the list, -1. States sub length of states -1 is always going to be the last one. And remember, we talked about how, and I'm proud of this, computer scientists tend to be lazy. We try to come up with shortcuts where we can. Since this is always going to be length of states -1, I can just abbreviate that as -1. So if I say, excuse me, states sub -1, remember that's always the last one. And I get this by just counting backwards. So that's counting forward and counting backward. Now, so let me add to the note, to the coding. I've got the length function. And I'll put it in comments so it doesn't give me anything. States sub length of states is always an error. The last element is always, and this I'll put in code because it won't give me an error. And that's abbreviated. Okay, count back, fix my typo. Now, there's talk of DC and Puerto Rico becoming states, but they're not yet. So, removing elements from a list by value, you use the remove statement. So, states dot remove Washington, D.C. And now, if I do a quick check at my value, I can see that Washington, D.C. is now gone. It is no longer a state. By index, if I want to remove a value from a list by index, that's using the pop command, states.pop. And in this case, since I knew I inserted Puerto Rico at index 23, I'm just going to pop element 23. Python is nice enough to tell me that the state it's removing is Puerto Rico. You can actually use this in an expression if you want to write code this way. We'll talk about that later, but you can. But it tells me it removed Puerto Rico. Now I can look and I can see that I am back to 50 states and that they are the 50 states that I expect. Okay, so covering again from last Wednesday, insert and append, insert in a specific place, append at the end. Remove, removes by value. Pop, removes by index. If there is not an element there, or if there's more than one value in this list of states, of course, each state appears only once. If there were more than one state with the same name, then remove only removes the first one. It does not remove multiple ones. If you want to remove them all, you have to do it multiple times. If there is no value with that name in it, it's going to cause an error. In other words, if I said states.remove France, there is no state called France. I get an error and my program crashes. So I use in to tell me whether something is in the list or not. So, for example, if France in states, okay, so in returns is a Boolean. It returns true if France is an element of states. It returns false otherwise. Then I do states.remove France, else print it wasn't there. Okay, so let's run that. There we go. And in fact, it works correctly. It removes France and it wasn't there. Okay, if I do the same code, let's take states. Let's take that same thing and change France to Wyoming. And if Wyoming is there, let's get rid of Wyoming as a state. Let's presume I know how to spell Wyoming correctly. Now we find that this worked correctly, and Wyoming is gone. And we can scroll out here to verify that. There is no more Wyoming. Now, if I run that same code, I get this error message that said Wyoming was gone. Okay, so let's, since it goes at the end, let's just put Wyoming back as a state. So this is all the stuff we've covered last week. Basic idea of lists, the fact that you have the types, the fact that you can insert and append, the fact that you can remove and pop, the fact that you can take the length, the fact that you can count forwards and backwards, and how all these things work. The one thing I haven't shown is the del, del, delete. Del is used to delete multiple values at the same time. It saves you from having to repeat, remove, or pop. That's fine. I won't show an illustration. There's an example in the slides. We'll go on to it. I need to get to new material. So finally, new material. And the first thing we're going to do is list slicing. Suppose I only want some of the states. I want the states that are the first 10. Okay, how do I do that? I'm going to create a new variable called first 10 states. And how I'm going to get that is I'm going to slice from the original list variable states 0 through 10. I'll explain this syntax in a minute and talk about variants of it. What I'm going to do is copy into a new variable the first 10 states. Okay, and now if I look at it, I'll say, what is the length of first 10 states? It better be 10. Hooray, that works. And here are indeed the values. Now, the last item in this list is Georgia. I did it this way so I didn't change the original value of states. I still have my list of all 50 states. I haven't changed it. The last value in here, the last value in first 10 states is Georgia. We know that. What is the value? What is the index of Georgia? Well, states sub 9 is Georgia. So what this does is it copies states sub 0, states sub 1, and so on up to states sub 9. It does not copy states sub 10. Sorry, just saw the question in the chat. What does length mean again? Length is how many elements are there. Okay, so length means how many separate elements are there. In this case, there are 50 states or 51, 52. So length is just how many elements there are. Okay, so the syntax the syntax of this list slicing start at the first element listed, stop and do not include the second index listed. So when I say states 0 to 10, that means start at states sub 0 and copy up to states sub 10, but do not include states sub 10. Okay, this can take some getting used to, but what it means is the syntax is start at this one and include it. Stop when you get to this, do not include. The second 10 states. The second 10 states equals states. Now I'm going to start at 10 and I'm going to go to 20. The reason that's relevant is I do not include 20. I mean, again, this can be confusing because this says start at 10 and go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay. Do not include 20. And in fact, 10 through 19 is 10 states. Okay. So if I look at second 10 states, it has the 10th state, Hawaii, all the way up through Maryland, which is number 19. Okay. And if you go back and count from the original, I'm not going to do that right now, but if you go back to the original definition of states, you can count and you can see that Alabama is 0 and so on. Hawaii is 10, Maryland is 19. Okay. And so then you do not include 20. As I said, when I say it's confusing, if you look at this, you say, well, from 10 to 20 is not 10 states. From 10 to 20 is 11, right? 10 through 20 inclusive is 11. The trick is this is inclusive, this is not. Now, if you said something like this, second 10 states equals states sub 10 to 19, well, because 10 through 19 inclusive is 10 values. Now, when you look at it and you count it, you see that this variable would only have 9 elements. So you had a list variable you thought had 10 states. It's only got 9. So that's what I'm trying to illustrate by showing these is how this index works. You start at this value and you include it, but you do not include this value. You stop when you get to this. You don't include it. Okay. So that's the index. And if you make an error a few times, it's okay. We all do. I still do it on occasion. You're going to get a lot of syntax errors. Your index is off by 1 and so on. So this technique is called list slicing. Okay. List slicing takes some of the elements of the original list and puts them in a sublist, a new variable, first 10 states, second 10 states. I don't have to assign them to a new variable. I could print with them, or I could do something else with them. And we are going to do something else with them on Wednesday. Okay. But this technique is called list slicing. Now, there are 2 syntax notes about list slicing. The first example I gave you is first 10 states equal states sub 0 to 10. This is the same as first 10 states equal states subcolon to 10. Okay. So let's demonstrate. This is our original definition. And we have Alabama through Georgia. Now I'm going to just say, I'll call it something else. F10S equals states colon to 10. And you see you get the same thing. And let's just for kicks get ahead in list behavior. Sorry, that's an assignment, not a comparison. That's true. The two lists are identical. Okay. So what I'm illustrating there is if you want to start at the beginning, you don't have to include the 0. If there's no number here, that means start at the beginning. From the beginning up through 10. A missing first number before the colon means start at the beginning. You don't have to explicitly say 0. Now, what if the second number is missing? A missing second number after the colon means go to the end. So in other words, if I want to say states sub 20 to we know the last one is length of states. I can try to figure out, well, do I want to say from the states of 20 to length of states? Let's see if that works. That indeed will work because I never actually try to include this thing, which is an error. I can get the rest of them, but I could shortcut that. I could write it more easily by saying states from 20 to the end. Leave off the last parameter, and it's the same thing. And if we scroll over to the right, we see these are identical. Okay. Is the same as states sub 20 to the end. If I want the whole list, I can leave out both numbers. States sub colon. Okay. If I have this, then what that says is give me everything. There's no number here, so it says start at the beginning. There's no number here, means go to the end. Sorry, just saw the question in the chat. Yep, 0 through 10 means start with 0 and include everything through 9. Do not include 10. That is correct. That's what that means. Okay, that's going to be the hardest thing to get in touch with, to get full control over. You're going to make that error of having indices off by 1 or discounting. It's okay. It's just something to get used to. It's just because we started 0, that happens. Okay. So this is list slicing. Okay. List slicing says take your original list and slice it up, take a piece of it. And the way we do it is by the subscripts separated by colon in the square brackets. Now, what about strings? That's all the topics, that's all the new topics we have for lists right now. We will revisit lists in a few weeks after exam 1. Now we're going to cut to strings and how they're kind of like lists, but they're not really. Okay. So let's come up with a string variable. String variable is equal to, let's come up with a long string. I don't know. The bank was closed today, comma, much to my unhappiness. Okay. So that's our string. Now, spoiler alert from much later in the semester, strings are different from lists in that you can change an element of a list, but you cannot change an element of a string. But you can look at it. Each character, each letter, each special character, each digit in the string has its index. It has a subscript. The string has a subscript just like a list does. And just like a string, just like a list, you start counting at 0. So that's our string variable. String variable sub 0 is the letter capital T. Okay. String variable sub 1 is the letter H. Okay. And so on. So just like it was an element of the list, you can access each element. You can call out each element in the string by using its subscript. Now, you cannot change it, and this is how strings are different from lists. In our list of states that we talked about, instead of the first state, state sub 0 being Alabama, let's change it to Auburn, just because. And now you can see that I've changed an element of a list. But a string is not like that. What a string can do, we have the string. If I said string variable sub 0 equals capital B, what I'm going to get told is that you can't do that. You can't change an individual element of a string. You can change a list, but you can't change a string directly in this way. So each character in the string has its index, and you can do certain things. You start counting at 0, you can access it. Okay, but you can't change anything. Can you append? Can I put an exclamation point at the end of my string? Nope. I cannot change the value of a string. I can access it, but I can't change it. Anything that changes it is going to fail. But I can use in. Okay, key point here. Can't change the value of the string, but you can read it. You can access it. This is kind of a you can read, but you can't write. Okay. What we're going to do now is say we can use in. Okay. If a comma in string var print it has a comma. Okay. Silly, but that's fine. It just demonstrates that in will win. It will work for us. So Strings are like lists in that you can access things, individual characters, you can read them, you cannot change them. You can use in, you can use length. What is the length of the string variable? 49. That's how many characters you've got. Okay, so you can do that. Now, there's a couple of other things that are very, very useful for string operations that we need to talk about. One is splitting a string into components, like words. Okay. Split takes a string and returns a list. Okay, so we've got our variable string var. We're going to say string var, and we're going to say list L is equal to string variable dot split. Okay, and let's see what this does first, and then we'll explain it. Okay, here is what L is. If you look at the original string, it was this sentence. What L is, after I split it, is it's a list where each element of my list is a word of the string. I took the original string and I split it up into a list of words. Now, how does this work? We're going to assume the default case right here. If there's nothing in the parentheses, split breaks up the string on white space. We've talked about this before, but let's reemphasize. White space is spaces, tabs, or new line characters. And remember, new line is a \n. A tab is a \t. Anytime it sees one of those, anytime split sees a white space character, a blank space, a tab, or a new line, split starts a new word and deletes the white space. So it's gone. In the original string, these characters, so for example, string variable sub4 is a blank space. 0, oops, sorry, that's an error. String var sub3 is the blank space. Okay, and so it printed out the blank space. In the original, there was a blank space there, and that blank space was part of the string. If you look at L, and you look at the original string, what happened is, when I said split, Python said T, H, E, blank space, stop. THE is the first element in the list. Take the blank space, throw it away. The next element in the list starts with a B. B, A, N, K, blank space, stop. BANK is the next element in the list. Throw the blank space away. Now these commas here remember, in a list we've covered on last week and a little earlier today, the elements of a list are separated by commas. So these commas are just saying this is an element of the list, this is an element of the list. The next element of the list is WAS, blank space. Throw the blank space away, comma. CLOSED, blank space. Now, TODAY, comma. Comma is not blank space. Comma is a character that's not a space. It's not a new line. It's not a tab. So comma gets included with today. This is all one word. Then the blank space causes Python to stop. So TODAY, comma is all one word. And so that's why what happens in the list is that TODAY, comma is one word. Then, of course, you use the comma to separate list elements. So that's what's going on here. What's going on here is that today, comma is one element. It took the comma from my string. That's a list element. This is just the separator. So I looked at it as I was preparing this program earlier today and realized this can be kind of confusing when you see comma, quote, comma. That's what's going on. This Y, comma, this is part of the word, end of word, list separator, and so on. So split, by default, takes your string and splits it up into a list of words, splitting on white space. Now, it doesn't have to split on white space. You can tell it something else. Okay, you can tell it something else. For example, I'm going to say I want you to split on S. So L1, the next list, is equal to string variable dot split on S. Okay. Now let's look at what happens here. What happens here is Python goes through this string and continues until it hits an S. It hits this S, that's where it stops. Okay. And then, just like the white space in the previous example, it throws it away and starts a new word. So, T, H, E, blank space, B, A, N, K, blank space, W, A, hit an S and stop. So this right here is the first word. This right here is the first word. Start at the beginning, go until you hit an S, because an S is what's in here, it's what you're looking for. Now, that's the first word. End the word and throw away this S. You'll notice there is no S in the list. The S is thrown away. Start a new word here. Blank space is not an S, so blank space, C-L-O, oops, another S. So the second word is blank space, C-L-O. Start a new word, throw this S away. E-D, all, oops, start at E, E-D, all the way down to this S in unhappiness. That is my third word in my list. Third word here, throw the S away. Start. Immediately hit an S. What that does is it says have a zero length word, this empty string. That's the fact that you have these two S's together. Okay. So throw this, hit the E, end the word. Throw the S away, start another word. Throw that S away, start another word. Hit an S. We have nothing. We have an empty string, but an empty string's valid. 0 characters. Put an empty string. Throw this S away. Start again. We don't know where the end of this word, end of this string is. Start again, empty string, end of word. So when I say split on the S, I get first word, second word, third word, fourth word is an empty string, fifth word is an empty string. That's what happens when you don't let it default to splitting on the white space. So you can split a string by default on the white space or on anything explicitly that you say. In this case, I said split on the S's. The 2 things to remember are the word is everything until it hits the next one of these characters. And when you process this character, you throw it away. The original down here, we split on white space. There is no white space in the list. The second example, we split on the S. There is no S down here in the list. There is white space. There are blanks because we didn't split on white space. So we kept them. Okay. So we'll get into a little bit later on Wednesday why this is important. But we need to cover how it works. That it works this way, that you can split a string into a list. Takes a string, creates a list. If you say L1 right here is a list, if you try to say L1 dot split, that's an error because split has to only applies to strings. That has to be a string. If it's not string dot split, it's an error. Python will fail. So here I tried to use a list variable to split. You can't split a list. You can't split a list. You can only split a string. Okay. So string splitting. One other thing you can do is you can tell Python the maximum number of splits for words that you want. So suppose that I said L2, my next list, equals split the string on S, and I don't want you to produce this long thing. I want a maximum. Now, this is confusing again. When I say a maximum of 2, that means I'm going to get everything after the second word is going to get dumped into the last word. You're actually going to get 3. Let me illustrate. What's going to happen is this says after you get the second word, throw everything into the rest. So when I take the original string and I split it, it creates one word until it hits that S and was. Then it starts a new word and throws the S away. And it says, take the blank space CLO, stop when you get the S. Now I have 2 words. So what this syntax does is it tells Python 2 is enough, take everything else and throw it into the last word. Now you notice because it throws everything in the last word, it never processes these S's. It never processes these S's because that it's in the everything else. That's in essence in the string from where you are to the end. Okay. So that saves you. This is creating words or substrings. When somebody tells you a substring, that means you just a part of the string, which is what we've done here. Each word, each component of this list is a substring, is a part of this. what split's doing behind the scenes is it's creating these substrings that it then puts in this list. Okay. If I want to do the original thing, split on white space, but only have a certain number of them, okay, it turns out you can't do that. Okay. If you're splitting on white space, you'll get however many words there are. If you're splitting on something else, now you can tell that I want you to split on a blank space and I only want 3 words. That's valid. And now if you see that, then what you get is the same behavior, splitting on white space, but after 1, 2, 3, throw everything else, including all the blank spaces, into the end. So giving this number parameter, giving this number in the split call says you will get that many words plus the rest. Okay. And if you want to do this with blank space, then you're going to have to explicitly call out blank space in the split. You can't use the default. Okay, again, if you tried to say, you know that this just says split on white space, but doesn't limit the number. If you tried to say split on white space, but give me only 3, that's an error. You can't do that. If you want to do something like this, where we split on white space, but we only want a maximum number, you would do it like this. Okay. So that's splitting. Okay. The last string method we're going to cover tonight is strip. Strip gets rid of white space from a string, and it returns another string. But not embedded white space, only at the beginning and end. Okay, what do I mean by that? Suppose I have a variable called newString, and for some strange reason, it has a tab and then 3 spaces and then some number of words and then a tab and some spaces. Okay, and that's my string. Okay, that's my string. It's got these things. But when I'm printing it out, it gives me ugliness. It gives me things I don't like. I want beautiful. Here's the tab and all those blank spaces. Here's a tab and all the blank spaces. Yeah, this is ugly. I don't like that. I want nice, neat things. How I would get rid of those things is I would say new string, let's call it NNS for new string, equals new string dot strip. And now when I print the new string, you'll notice that all of that ugliness, all those tabs and blank spaces before are gone, and all of the tabs and blank spaces after are gone. What strip does is it gets rid of leading text, leading white space, and trailing white space. Now, again, white space meaning tabs and blank spaces. And if there were new lines in there too, the new lines would be gotten rid of. It just gets rid of all that white space character. Okay. Strip gets rid of white space at the front and the back. If you don't want all the white space gone, L strip or left strip just gets rid of the front white space. And R strip just gets rid of at end. And the example here, let's go back to my new string. Tab and blank space. Print new string dot L strip this tab and spaces are gone, but this tab and spaces are still there. Okay, so L strip or left strip, strip everything on the left, gets rid of the leading white space. It doesn't touch the white space at the end. That's L strip. Right R strip gets rid of the trailing white space. It doesn't touch the white space at the beginning. That tab and those spaces are all still there, but this junk in the end is gone. The end is right here at the S. There's nothing more here. Okay, so if you just want to get rid of the leading white space, you do that with L strip. If you just want to get rid of the trailing white space, that is R strip. If you want to get rid of all the spaces, the leading and the trailing white space both, that's just strip. L strip, R strip, and strip. Again, this does not get rid of white space in the middle of the string. If you want to do that, that's where split comes in, and we'll talk some more about that the other day. I realized before I go back to my slides and make sure I've covered everything, I want to clarify what I mean by a substring. Okay, so we have the variable string var. Let's make sure it's still the same. Good. Substring. Take the first, for example, 10 characters of a string. Now, I can pick anything I want, but that's going to be substring equals string var sub 0 to 10. And remember, it works the same way as a list. You start at 0 and you do not include 10. But now you can see that substring has T, H, E, space, B, A, N, K, space, W. This is string var sub 0, 1, 2. The E is 2. The blank space is 3. The B is 4. The A is 5. The N is 6. The K is 7. The blank space is 8. And the W is 9. Okay. So when I say take a substring, that just means take some characters, some number of characters out of the middle of a string, the beginning, the middle, the end, and use that as a separate variable. That's a substring. And just like a list, I don't have to include the 0. If I don't, it says do the beginning. I don't have to include the end. If I say start at 10 and go till the end, okay, we start at 10 and go to the end. And if I want to make a copy of the whole string because I'm just going to do something, that says take the whole string. And it gets you everything. So when I say substring, I was realizing I don't think I have that in the slides. That's what I mean by that term, and you will hear that. So let's look at the slides and make sure I covered everything that I was supposed to be covering. Okay. Somebody type in the chat. Can you see the slides in presentation mode right now, or did I lose by going into presentation mode? Got them? Great. Okay. Elements of a list, square brackets, so on. Okay. Append and insert to add a new value. Append puts it at the end, one at a time. Insert puts it wherever you want. The index, the first element is always 0. Length tells you what the length of the list is, how many elements are in there. This is, again, always an integer. It's just a number. It's counting. The last element is always going to have the length of the list minus 1. And so, therefore, you can always count indices backward. The last item is minus 1. The next to last is minus 2. And so on. So you can count forward and backward. Removing an item by its value, that's remove. It only removes the first one. If the same in my state list, there was only one entry with a state name, that's fine. If there's more than one, you're only going to remove the first one. If there's no item in the list has that value, you get an error message and your program crashes unless you do something like use in to not check if it's not there. To remove an item by its index, use the pop. Remove and pop, index and value. And you can use delete to get rid of a bunch of these. Okay. The substring and so on. N is a Boolean function that you use with lists. It tells you true if the element is in the list and false if it's not. And you can use it to ensure that you don't try to remove an element that's not there. And therefore, you can stop your program from crashing. And an example I gave you here is, we don't want programs to crash in general. So we do the if in and we don't try to do something we know will fail. List slicing. This is what I did most of the time in PyCharm today. Here's my list of states. How do you get the first 10, 21 to 30, the last 20? You can slice, and I give you the example. The first 10 from 0 to 10 or from nothing before the colon to 10 gives you these. From 20 to 30, remember, if you want the 21st state, the 21st state has index 20. The first one is 0. So the 21st has index 20. And if you go 20 up and stop and don't include 30, that gives you Massachusetts through New Jersey. And if you just want the last 20, you can start at negative 20 and go to the end. Okay, remember, I can start counting negative. So if I want the last 20, I take the slice from negative 20 to the end. And Python will start counting and go negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8, negative 9, negative 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. New Mexico is indeed negative 20, so start at negative 20 and go to the end. Okay. So if I tell you, give me the last however many in a list, that's an easy way to do it. Start counting negative and go to the end. The term is slicing, and I've talked through this, but that's a quick summary in text of how it works. Then we went into strings. Strings are not lists. They're treated as a unitary item. You can't change them, but you can do some things that are the same with strings that you can do for lists. Okay. For now, you can get the value of any particular character or set of characters by using an index. Start counting at 0. Here, string bearer 0 is A. From 1 to 3, you get BC. Because you start at 1, you do not include 3. Okay. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. Does N work? Yes. You can check to see that a letter is in a string so you don't try to do something that causes your program to crash. Do append or insert work? No. Anything that's going to change the value of the string will not work. You can change the value of a list, but you cannot change the value of a string. Okay, spoiler alert, that's an answer we'll get to way later in the semester, but no, it's not on this test. You can't do them. Can you remove pop or del? Nope, because they would change the value of the string. As long as you don't change the value of the string, you can use in, you can use length, you can do a substring, you can do slicing, you can do all that other stuff. We talked about split. Split takes a string. The input to split must be a string. And what it returns is a list. It essentially cuts a string that's a sentence into words. And here's another example I gave you more. It, by default, splits on white space. The other operation, strip, removes leading or trailing white space, and we talked about some examples here. That was last year's Super Bowl score, by the way. Splitting strings, you default by any white space Python can recognize spaces, tabs, new lines. We haven't covered form feeds. Let's go to the top of the new page. That's a page break. Form feed is old style for page break. Python can also recognize a page break as white space. Some examples. If you split on white space, this will tell you what it'll do. You can split on the E, since there were a lot of E's in my sentence there instead of S. Okay, and remember the trick is this is going to be thrown away. This character that we split on is going to be thrown away. As long as you treat numbers as a string, you can split them as well. Okay. And don't worry about the for loop. We're going to cover that on Wednesday. Strip gets rid of trailing or leaving white space. L strip, left strip, gets rid of white space at the beginning. R strip, right space, gets rid of white space at the end. And strip gets rid of space on both white space on both the left and the right, beginning and end. Does not get rid of blank spaces between words in a string. You won't get rid of white spaces in the middle. String slicing, substringing, what I just showed you right at the end. Take a slice or a part of each string by specifying the characters you want. Slices, that is, again, taking a substring. You'll hear the term substring all the time. And that is the end of the lecture, and I have covered everything I'm supposed to. I have 7 minutes left on the clock, but I'm done, so either you get an extra 7 minutes if you're fine, or I will be here answering questions. Your choice. Anybody has any questions, feel free. Otherwise, I'll see you Wednesday.
I have a general question, but it involves showing my code. So it's about, I can describe it real quick. It's about the coding standards.
Yep. Okay, talk to me about it. So
I read on the coding standards that it is a requirement that you need, well, not a requirement, but it's about comments and how often you should comment on your code.
Right.
Is that it says that you should comment on, quote unquote, any confusing looking code. And that's pretty subjective. So yeah, it's basically try to put yourself in your TA or my shoes. I realize that's hard because you don't know what our level of expertise is. But the reason you do this is because we're going to grade the code and we're going to look at it and we're going to say, yep, nope, don't understand that, or that looks wrong.
So basically, if there's something that if I were sitting with you and I would go, what's that doing right there? Because I don't get it. Okay, then you should put a line of code in. And it's better to put extra comments than less. Now, if you say I plus equals 1, right, because you're into incrementing a counter or something, you don't need to comment I plus equals 1. We figure out, we can look at it and go, yeah, he's incrementing a counter. Cool. If you've got some really bizarre Boolean condition in an if statement, then add a comment that says, I'm checking to see if the following is true, right? On homework 1, we're going to be pretty lenient, but basically, if you think I would look at your code and go, what are you doing here? Throw in a comment. But don't put in a comment that says I plus equals 1, comment, I am adding 1 to I. Yeah, we don't need that.
All right, gotcha.
Okay, cool. No problem. Anybody else with questions? No? Okay, fantastic. Thank you all. And I will see you on Wednesday when we'll talk about for loops and hopefully make this stuff make more sense. Recording stopped.